In this video, we're going to get started with using data files in Easy Composites version 2. And in this video, I'll be discussing using the data file for text replacement, logo replacement, and also forcing the teacher and principal here into the center of the template, which in this template are slots 1 and 2. Also in this video, I'm going to be discussing a couple of things that could be common areas that trip you up in your data. And one is if you have commas in your data file. So for instance, this text layer that's got Mr. Reynolds, comma, 5th grade. And also if you have accent marks in the text on your file. So for example, Grace Gomez here with the O with the accent mark over it. So with that, there's something you need to also do when you save your data file to make that work properly. So anyways, I'll just get started here. And the first thing you need to do when you are going to run a data file is you need to know what data headers that you're going to need. So in the graphics file here, you're going to need to know what your text layers are named, and they're going to need to be named in a specific way for those to work with the data file. And so for this example, we've got 3 text layers, year, teacher, and school name. We've also got a logo file as well in here. So we'll be discussing all this here, and I'm going to first show you that even if you're not using the data file starter, it's good to be familiar with it, because you might be getting your data file from an external source, like from your school, or you might have a system in place that's taken a scanner system that's created a data file for you. But if you want to know what the headers need to be named, in this data file starter, it's got all of the headers listed, and any of the headers need to be named exactly like you see in the data file starter. So if it's not listed here, it's not a valid header that Easy Composites will recognize. So I'm going to be using the data file starter for this demonstration, but like I say, come in here even if you don't plan to use it, just so you know what the proper header names are that you need to be using. So with the data file starter, you can choose your delimiter, comma, tab, semicolon, or colon. If you have commas in the file name, or if you have commas in your data for like your text layers or whatever, you cannot use a comma separated file. You'll have to use one of the others. Now in this case, I'm going to select comma because I'm going to show you how to change that in the spreadsheet program when you save it. But just know that you can't use commas if you have commas in your data set. And for file type, it can accept CSV, TXT, or TSV files. And for the purpose of Easy Composites, it doesn't matter what the file extension is. It can be any of those 3, and any of those 3 can use any of the other delimiters for your data. So you could have a CSV with a semicolon delimiter. You could have a TSV with a comma delimiter. I mean, that's not the standard way you'd set those files up, but Easy Composites can accept that. It's going to automatically determine what your delimiter is when it imports the data. But for the case of this, I'm just going to use a comma separated CSV when I export, and then I'll show you how we would need to change that because we have commas in our data in the spreadsheet program. Now, this next checkbox, get names from file names. If you remember from the prior videos, where if you have your files set up with last name underscore first name, where you could use that data when you build your composites to automatically import those names into the text layers. The same thing here. If you hit get names from file names, if your files are set up with last underscore first, this will import that data into the spreadsheet. So I'm going to check that because I've got the file set up that way. And then if you want to select all headers, which you'd probably never want to do, but if you hit this button, it will select everything. If you clear that, it'll clear everything. And for this particular template, I know I'm going to need this one called text. I'll discuss what these do after I build it. I'll need force order. Group ID I won't need for this demonstration, but I'm going to briefly talk about that, so I'm going to grab that one. And then remember, in our graphics file, so where it says group level text layers, this is anything within the graphics file. This is group level, so it's not, these text layers are not specific to each image slot. They're for the whole group. So we'll need teacher, grade, and year. I've also got a logo in here set up, so I'll logo file is the header for that. So I'm going to hit create data file, and then I'll need to go to the image folder and select the folder that contains the image files that's making the data for. And that's it. Once I press the button, it's going to create the data file for me. All right, so now we've got the data file that it created here. I'm going to open it with LibreOffice. It's the same thing as OpenOffice. You can use Excel or whatever. I just like this because I don't use spreadsheets much, so I don't have Excel. So when I'm opening this, it's automatically determined that it should be a comma because I saved this with a comma delimited CSV file when I save that. But as mentioned, if you remember from what we were going to do here, I was going to put a comma in one of those cells, so I can't save this with a comma delimited file. All right, so we've got our data headers in here. So the cell A1 has to be all caps, Easy Comp. And that's how Easy Composites knows where to start the data. So if you're using a program, I think Numbers is one of them on Mac, that will create hidden headers in your file. This is how it knows to ignore those hidden headers and where the data starts. So you have to have this in cell A1. Everything else can be in any order. So if you're using another program to create your data sheets, the order of these does not matter beyond cell A1. But the headers have to be exactly like you see in this data file starter. This has all of the available headers, with the exception of this will not show first name and last name, because these are always created regardless of what you select. Even if you uncheck everything in the data file starter, it will still make first name and last name, and it's imported that data based on those file names, because those files were named last_first, and since I checked this get names from file names, it's automatically brought that in. Okay, so first and last name, let's discuss these really quick. That's just going to use that data to replace the text in your image names. So you see that our text layer here is name -easycomp-003. So that is the name for this third image slot. You notice this is one layer here. But what Easy Composites is going to do is automatically going to combine the first and last name into a single layer if it finds the single layer full name here, which is just this one called name. What you don't want to do is create a column called name in the spreadsheet and then combine them and put those here, this is not a valid header. It's not going to use that for anything. It's just going to ignore that. So leave the first and last names separated. If your data is coming in with first and last name in one column, you're going to have to separate it. So it's going to have to be first name, last name, separated into 2 columns. So let's open another spreadsheet here, or not a spreadsheet, excuse me, another template file. No, that's not the one I want. Yeah, center graphics should be one here. Okay, so in this template, first name and last name are on 2 separate layers. You see we've got a first name and a last name in 2 separate layers. In that case, it's still going to work with the same data set. So you don't have to change the data set based on whether the name is in 1 layer or 2. All right, so this layer called text, this is the one that in the data file starter I selected here. So anything that says image level optional headers, these headers are specific. These are image specific headers that you have data per image. So in this case, 2 of the layers, and those would be slots 1 and 2, have an additional text item. And let's see, those are in the center images on this template. And so they've got this additional item called text. So for the principal and the teacher here, it's got the name, which is all on 1 layer, and then it's got this additional text layer below for the words teacher or principal. That's what this column is. So what I'll need to do here is for the teacher, or for the principal here, let's put in principal, the text principal. And then for the teacher, you find it here. And that is going to tell it to replace that text in that layer with teacher. Now, if you're familiar with sports photo automation, you'll remember that there are resize columns in sports photo automation where you would have like resize hyphen text, and then you would have a code in there to tell it how to resize. You don't do that for any text layers, whether it's the student text layers or whether it's the main template text layers. You don't use those resize columns anywhere in the data sheet at all. But you still do get automatic resizing with Easy Composites. And for anything that's a image slot specific text, so that's first name, last name, and text here. So for these items, these will automatically resize if the text goes beyond the width of the placeholder text in the template. So the placeholder text being this text here. So how the width of this, if your text is above that width, it will automatically resize it to fit that width. If it's smaller, it won't. That's the only resizing it does. There are no other modes that it does. It just, if it's too long, it resizes. And that's for the image specific text. Oh, by the way, in this template, you don't see slots 1 and 2. That's because on this specific design, I put image slots 1 and 2 in the graphics file. And I do that strategically on some templates. So that way, if it's something I think the users might want to change those slots around, that way you don't have to change those slot positions for every single layout file. You can just do it once in the graphics file, and it will change the positioning of those two, which made sense for this file. But so yeah, so for this file, so all of those text layers are using the automatic resizing if the text is too long. Now with the graphics or with the sorry, there's a lot here, but if you're having trouble remembering all this, just watch this video a couple times. Like I said, there's a lot here, but in the data file starter, anything that's called group level text, this is the text items that are on your graphics file, and this is group level, so it's not going to replace this text differently for each image. It's for the entire group. So anything here, you have the option of how it resizes, but still in the data file, you're not going to do the same thing you did in Sports Photo Automation. So you're not going to put resize teacher there. I decided that there was a better way to do this, so I implemented that here. I'm probably going to implement this in Sports Photo Automation in the future too. But the change I made was the resizing is defined in the template, and in your data file, you don't specify the resizing. So that way you can use the same data file for multiple templates, and you won't have to change your data file just to run a different template. And I think it makes a lot more sense that way. So in your data file, the text items will be called teacher, grade, year, or whatever is in whatever you see here, whatever data items you want to use for the text need to be match exactly what you see in this create data file. Your headers have to match that exactly. So how you determine how it's going to resize the text is done inside this graphics file here, the layer name of that text layer. So for example, if you just put school name like this, it's not going to do any resizing. Now there's only 2 resize modes, and those modes are -R at the end, and that just stands for resize, or -RM, that's resize maximum. So if it's just -R, then it's always going to scale the text to fit the width of the placeholder text. So in the case here, it would stretch everything out to this width or shrink everything down to that width. And so this is probably too wide for a standard resize mode, but that's typically not the one you're going to use. Most often, the one you want to use is the RM, and this is resize maximum. So what that'll do is if the text is less than the width of the placeholder text, it's not going to resize it, but if it goes too long, it's going to resize it down to fit whatever you have in the template for that size. And even if you put -RM or -R in your text layer, you don't put it in your data sheet. And again, that is because you might have different templates that use different resize modes based on how those templates lay out. And that way you don't have to edit this in order to change how it's going to resize on a specific template. That's all handled within the template. Also, the -RM, even though there's only 2 modes, these still do the same thing, and it's actually better than what is in Sports Photo Automation. So for example, if you have angled text in here, -RM will still work. So in Sports Photo Automation, you had AM for angled, YM for vertical, and XM for horizontal. The way I did it here was better, and I wanted to do it this way in Sports Photo Automation, but I had not figured out how to do that yet. But this resize maximum, it's automatically going to figure out if your text is angled, vertical, horizontal. You can even use the vertical type tool for one of your layers here. And it's going to be able to figure that out too. So you only need 2 modes with this. The only other thing I'll point out about text layers is in order for the text layer text replacement to work, they have to be point text. So if you right click on it and you see convert to paragraph text, it's already in point. But if you double click on your layer here and you see a bounding box, then you're in paragraph text. And if you right click on there and see convert to point text, you have to do that to get it in point text. Because if you see convert to point text, that's in paragraph text. So all the layers that you're replacing text have to be point text. And in point text, you won't see a bounding box on your text. Also, if you hit convert to point text in your graphics file here, it's going to convert automatically all of the text layers that are a standard text name that goes with the data file starter. Okay, so hope that all makes sense there. Now we need to fill the data sheet out to correspond to these. So in the data sheet, the group level text items are the ones that are meant for the entire group and not image specific. And in those, you only need to put those in for one of your rows. So on this, we're going to do Mr. Reynolds, comma, 5th grade. Now you could have grade on a separate text layer, but if you want to put it on the same as like the teacher and the grade on the same text layer, you can do it in one data cell here. Oh, you know what I did? I exported teacher, grade, year. We needed school name. Okay, no big deal. Let's get rid of the all right, so for school name, let's just say Challenger Elementary. Okay, year, I'll just put 2024, 2025. Okay, and logo file. If you're going to automatically replace logos in your graphics file, it has to be set up with one of the logo layer. And to get that in there, you would just hit add logo smart object. It's going to add this smart object called logo. And then you'll need to move that into your overlays folder. It's got to be inside that folder somewhere, so that way when it builds the file, when it combines this file with the layout file, it brings that over. But I've already done that for this one. Then also for your logos, in order for it to get the logo file, it's got to be in a folder called logos. That's under the folder that's in a subfolder that your images are in a folder called logos. And then you could put any logos you want for your batch, or it doesn't have to be a batch. In this case, we're not going to be doing a batch, but if it's in a batch, you would have all your images in one folder and then the logos in a subfolder. So in this case, we got a logo called bulldog.tiff. Your logo has to be TIFF, PNG, or WEPI, or that's a WEBP file, but one of those 3 files for your logos. So Bulldog .tiff. Okay, last thing that we need to set up is we want to force this teacher and principal into those slots 1 and 2 like we see right here. So this is slot 1, this is slot 2. And it's very simple in the data sheet. We just put 1 by the teacher, 2 by the principal. And this works the same as when you're using your sorting by data file name if you weren't using a data sheet. It's not actually, number 1 does not correspond to slot 1. Number 2 doesn't correspond to slot 2. So for example, if you were trying to put something in slots 7 and 8 and you typed in 7 and 8, this would go in slot 1 and this would go in slot 2 because this is only affecting the sorting order, if that makes sense. But we'll just put 1 and 2 because it makes sense usually to use slots 1 and 2 for that. Okay, this file is ready to run. The only other thing, now I did put this header in there, but we're not going to use it for this. I'll be using this in the next video, but group ID, this is if you were running a batch and you had, like, say, two or more classes. It doesn't matter what text you would have in the group ID. You could use teacher name or just numbers. It really doesn't matter, but you would use this so it would know how to group the images. So for example, one composite would be these images, and the next composite would be the ones, and it groups those by whatever text is in here. All right, so the last thing is we need to save this data sheet, but since we've got a comma in this, remember I said we can't use a comma delimiter in the data file. Also, we've got some accent marks, like for the name Perez and Gomez, and some of those. So when we save it, we have to make sure we save it properly so that it can import those character values correctly. So I'm going to save the data sheet here. I'm in OpenOffice or LibreOffice, which is basically OpenOffice. If you're in Excel, it's going to work pretty much the same way. But I'm going to have to hit Edit Filter Settings. And then when I hit Save, it's going to give me some options. And so the field delimiter, this is the from the data file start. Remember we said delimiter, comma, tab, semicolon, or colon. This is the field delimiter in the export. Since we have a comma in our data set here, we need to use either semicolon, colon, or tab. Can't use space because there's spaces a lot of times in your text layer, so that I didn't even set up the program to work with the space delimiter. But I'm just going to use semicolon here. Doesn't really matter. We can do a semicolon delimited.csv file. That'll work fine. And character set, you'll need to use Unicode UTF-8 in order to get your text to work if it has the special characters. And this is the same for sports photo automation. If you want to use special characters, you have to make sure that your character set is set to Unicode UTF-8. By default, I think the default is one of these Western Europes. I can't remember which one. I think wanting to say the Western Europe ISO 8859-1. Don't quote me on that, but I'm thinking this is the one it will default to. After you change it to Unicode, it will probably remember that next time you do, but it has to be Unicode 8. Okay, now that the data file has been saved, this should work if I did everything correctly. I know that was a lot here, but let's run this and test this just to see. So if you've already got your data file in there and you make changes, even if you've saved your data file, you still have to re-upload to import that new data after you've saved it. Okay, let's hope we did this right. All right, you can see that all the text replacement worked. The names such as Gomez here with the accent marks worked correctly because we used that UTF-8. You do have to make sure too that whatever font you are using does support those characters as well, which in the layout designer, it just uses Arial font by default for the names. So that will always support those characters. But for your group level fonts in your graphics file, if you're using some fancy font you found off of a website online, those fonts often don't have those characters and you'll just see like the default placeholder box. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to show you one thing too while I'm here. I'm going to resave this as a comma delimited just so I'll show you what happens and what to look out for. Now you can use a comma as long as your data doesn't have commas in it, but in this case we have this comma here, so it's not going to work. And then when I import the data files, it should give me an error here. So it's giving me this data validation failed, and this is basically telling you what I just told you here, is that that comma is going to mess things up. It's going to allow you to try to run with it because there are situations that will cause that error to occur without it being actually a data issue. So for example, if you've got some stray data outside here, let's resave this as a semicolon delimited file. Now, if I try to import the data now, it's going to give me that same error, but in this case, it's actually going to work because it's not too smart on the validation. It's basically just looking at how many headers you have and then how much data is in each row. And if you've got extra data, even if you have extra spaces out here that are invisible, like if this cell has a bunch of spaces here, that's something that it'd be impossible to see in the data, but it will cause extra columns. And then if we open up this CSV file, if you ever want to see your delimiters and see what the file is doing, if you open that in Notepad or Text Edit on Mac, you can see our semicolon that is separating between the columns. But you can see all these extra semicolons on the end and then this letter G. That is from where I put this extra data in here. So basically, we've got this extra data in this file, but there's no headers associated with it. You see we've got these blank headers up here. And that's not going to cause a problem there with it running, but it will cause that error to pop up when you load it. And that's why it allows you to run with this. Because if you're importing your data sheets from other files you have that have lots of data and you might have some missing headers or what have you that don't affect Easy Composites, is still going to allow you to try to run with that data file. So, but just be aware if you do see this message, and if you're using a comma in your data, just make sure that you don't have commas in your data and you're using a comma delimited file. So think that about covers it. That was a lot. I apologize. This video was very long, and the best way you'll start learning this is just to start playing around with this. I do suggest when you're using data files, don't do it in batch mode at first. Do it like we did here, where you're just running one. That way you can kind of run one and see how it affects your data file, affects the file output, and you can change it up. Once you've learned that, then you'll want to start learning batching with this group ID, which I'm going to be covering this group ID in the next video. So anyways, thanks for sticking it through this entire video, and hope this helps.